Good evening, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our live telephone town hall meeting. My name is Jason, your moderator for tonight's call. This is your opportunity to ask us questions on the process of the decommissioning of the Martin Drake Power Plant. If you would like to get in line to ask a question live, please press 0 on your phone now. If you prefer not to ask your question live, you should still press 0 to submit your question, then let your operator know that you want me to read your question over the air, and I am happy to do that for you. Again, please press 0 to ask a question in our forum. And it's my pleasure to kick off this live Teletown Hall event by turning it over to Colorado Springs City Council member and Utilities Board Chair, Tom Strand. If you would, Mr. Strand, and remember, folks, just press 0 to submit a question to tonight's event.
Good evening. I want to thank everyone on the line for joining us for this town hall meeting on the decommissioning of the Martin Drake Power Plant. One of the benefits of community ownership of our municipal utility is that you have a voice in how we operate. The Martin Drake Power Plant is a 185 megawatt coal-fired plant that provides about a quarter of our community's power year-round. We, as your utilities board of directors, have been studying earlier alternatives to the current date to close Drake Power Plant no later than 2035, including replacement generation scenarios. These scenarios can be broken down into 3 major categories. 1, replacement generation inside our service territory, that is at Drake or at our Birdsell location on North Nevada. 2, replacement generation outside our service territory. And 3, a combination of generation both inside and outside our service territory. For more detailed information on decommissioning of Drake and to see renderings of what the current site would look like without the Drake plant there and with different generation on that site, you can go to www.csu.org and click on the Martin Drake Power Plant from the home page. Tonight, joining me in this discussion to help answer your questions, I've got 5 City Council and Utilities Board members, including the Vice Chair, Andy Pico. We also have Board Member Jill Gabler, Board Member Bill Murray, and our newest board member, David Geisling. I would now like to introduce John Romero, who is the Colorado Springs Utilities General Manager of Energy Acquisition and Planning. That's quite a title, John. Who will give us a brief description of our process and some of the costs of the different options that are being considered. John?
Thanks, Chair Strand. The way we looked at the process was in 3 parts. We looked at the location of generation, the timing for decommissioning, which were the years 2025 and 2030 versus the year 2035, and the total cost of decommissioning. This resulted in about 6 specific scenarios, which we located into 2 main areas. The first was generation at Drake, and the other was no generation at Drake. So in order to estimate costs, we make assumptions regarding the cost of gas and coal over the next 30 years, and these are forecasts made by third-party experts. We also look at the cost of replacement generation if the Drake plant is no longer providing power. Included in that is the estimate of how much our city will grow over the years to ensure we have sufficient power to meet our customers' needs over that period of time. After taking those assumptions into consideration, we compare each of the 6 scenarios to our decommissioning of the plant in 2035, which is our base year. What we found is that the cost over the next 25 years for all scenarios except for one was within 2% of the cost of decommissioning the plant in 2035. That means that the cost to decommission the plant, on average, is less than 2% over the next 25 years as to what we would have spent by shutting down the plant in 2035. That's in net present value. So that's about $130 million more than we would have normally spent. However, the cost to customers will be more for some than others based on how much energy they use. So, for example, when we shut down the plant, we will be spending $6 to $7 million more in fuel costs each year for every year the plant is shut down early. The rate impact, therefore, will be different for some customers versus others, and the board will be presented information on rate impacts for a specific scenario in December because some customers will see that larger impact than 2%.
Well, John, that rate information is critical, I think, to our customers and our owners of this municipally held utility. We are now ready to take questions from those of you that are on the phone.
John explained it very, very well, apparently.
So one question that we have here is, why is the utility board considering changing the closure and decommissioning date of the Drake Power Plant earlier than is currently planned? Mr. Strand?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. Last year in 2016, the board of directors for the utilities at that time set this date of 2035 as a not later than date to close Drake. We receive many communications. People come to our meetings and they feel that the Drake plant located in the downtown area could be better used for other opportunities, for commercial development, and that the concern is that as you come into the gateway of our town, downtown, and you see the stacks of a coal-burning fire plant, that is in fact, not the best introduction to a community that is the Olympic City. Coal-burning fire plants, they're not currently building any of these in the United States. This was built in 1958 or 9, I think, when we operated it. So it's been around for 60 plus years, and we're looking for alternative methods of using renewable energy and using fuels such as natural gas, which is in fact at least not as criticized by many of the community. The thing we like about our coal-burning plants is that it's one of the most affordable and inexpensive forms of fuel to provide energy. And anybody else that wants to jump in on why we're considering earlier dates? Bill, do you have some thoughts?
Well, no, it's getting obsolete as far as technology goes, and I think all of us need to be prepared. And part of the preparation is the studying. Is the technology answer?
Are we ready for our first live question then?
No.
Yes.
All right, let's go to Amy, please. Amy is in Colorado Springs. Hello, Amy. Please list your question for the forum.
Hello. This is Amy Gray from 350 Colorado Springs, and I think everybody on council knows me, so hello.
Hello.
Hi, guys. Well, I think that for everybody on this call, I'd just like to say that, Martin Drake is the only remaining downtown urban coal plant. And we'd like to know, does our local government really care about its citizens? And we would like them to not overlook what nearly every other city has figured out about public health and the potential for the city's economy. We don't want you to go the opposite direction and continue, to hide any information from the public or to deceive us and to continue the pollution and the climate impact. Not to mention that renewables would be a short-term, one-time cost up front for construction. Obviously, the fuel savings would be better in the long term as nature provides for free. What we do not want to see is to rely solely on fracked natural gas, which is far more detrimental to the planet in the long run. I do realize that we need it until battery storage becomes more economical. Council, what plans do you have to work renewables into the plan? So far, we've heard a lot about building a new gas plant, but as you know, at 350, we're strictly fossil-free, so we'd like to see a renewables quote put into those scenarios. So what's going on with renewables?
Amy, thanks for your continuing interest. We do appreciate it when you come to our board meetings monthly. And you are someone we see frequently, and we're glad you called in tonight. I do want to correct the fact that it is my understanding that this is not the only urban coal burning plant in the United States.
No, in Colorado.
In Colorado, we can accept that. And
sorry, I should have been more clear.
All right, that's good. I'm going to ask John if he would respond to the question about renewables, and we have a target goal of 20% renewables by 2020. And John, would you like to answer more questions about different alternatives for renewables, which primarily are going to be solar and wind, right?
That's correct. And in the analysis that we performed, all the results showed that we need about 128 megawatts of replacement power. And the selection that was made by extensive modeling was gas-fired generation, and that's the ability to dispatch when we need to dispatch the units. There is more renewable being added later, but when we look at solar and wind, specifically solar, we're only getting about 30% of that solar generation on the peak when we need it. So we typically peak between 5 and 7 o'clock in the evening, and many days the solar is already not at its peak anymore. So we're seeing about
tonight,
certainly in the more of the winter time, but in the summertime we're seeing only about 30% coincident with our peak. So it doesn't make that a very viable option. We do still need replacement power that we can generate from gas generation in order to meet the needs of our customers.
Anybody else at the table that want to respond? There you go, Amy.
All right, thank you very much for your question, Amy. The next question that we're going to take now is from Bonnie. Also, keep in mind that if you are joining us on tonight's town hall meeting and you would like to submit a question from the forum, please press 0 on your phone, and an operator will take your question and submit it to tonight's forum. And again, we are going to go to Bonnie now. Bonnie?
Hello, Bonnie. Yeah, welcome to this call-in program tonight.
Hello. I had clicked. You had said that I could find these plans online, so I went to Colorado Springs Utility, and I went to Martin Drake, where it has Drake planning discussion with page 1 of 11, but I do not see the specifics as far as I don't see the specifics. I see prospective primary rendering, which is at too much of a distance, but is this what you're trying to tell me is going to give me information?
Well, Bonnie, let me ask, when you clicked on www.csu.org and then Martin Drake Power Plant, did you click on renderings?
Yes, I did. That's where I get the 1 through 11.
And you looked at those, and your comment about them is what?
I would have expected some additional information. Basically, what I will vote for is replacing Martin Drake as fast as possible, period.
Yeah.
So as far as waiting to 2035, that's not something I'm in support of.
Right, I understand
And in the past, I've heard discussions on using the power transmission in Drake, but putting the power generation other places out of the area. And at that point, I thought it was the most effective and reasonable for our town. But I don't see the details here currently.
Yeah. Bonnie, you're saying you would like to see the replacement generation outside of the service territory where Drake is located?
Yes, although I imagine that we still have to use a little bit of Drake for power transmission.
Okay.
But as far as power generation, I don't see that that's needed. And you're not giving me enough information to believe that it is needed.
Your board of directors in December is going to look very carefully and make a decision about whether that 2035 date is the best for our community. All things considered, I think, from talking just for me, for Tom Strand, I think we're going to see a date earlier in the 2020s somewhere. and we'll appreciate people communicating with us what they think is appropriate given what the costs are to our ratepayers of an earlier closure. So that's going to be forthcoming within the next 30 days.
All right, and our next question is from Constance. Constance, if you are ready, please state your name and your question.
My name is Constance Rohr. I live in Colorado Springs, and I followed the Drake fairly closely, but probably not close enough. This is an opportunity for me to ask you, what about the long-term health effects? Money is always going to be enormous in any community, and it's fear-mongering to hang on to just money. What about the physical health problems?
Well, you know, the health problems are something that we take very seriously. Those factors are ones that are going to be involved in the analysis. So, you know, from my perspective, Tom Strand is something that I think about all the time and that we consider, and I'm going to look at the staff and see if the health concerns are something that we're certainly going to get more information on.
And this is Dave Geislinger. The only thing I would add, this is Dave Geislinger, is that issue has been brought to our attention repeatedly by several constituents. So it is something that is clearly important in this decision.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next question.
All right. And for our next question, we're going to go to Alex. Alex, you are live on tonight's telephone town hall. Please state your question. Alex?
Yeah, this is Alex. Yeah, hi. This is Alex Ham, west side of Colorado Springs. I was just hoping to get you guys to elaborate a little bit more on the 6 different plans that you guys had run some prelim analysis on. Was geothermal looked at all, and were there any rebates or buyback opportunities for solar in an individual generation capacity?
This is Tom Strand. I'm going to ask John Romero to respond to that concerning the geothermal alternative and respond to your question.
Yes. This is John Romero, and in the evaluation, we look at all different types of resources that would be available, from solar and wind to gas and geothermal, and we put in the various costs for each of those types of resources, and then we do a very extensive analysis to see which one is the most economic, and we always solve for the most economic solution. So in this particular case, while geothermal is in the mix, it was not selected as the most economic way to decommission the facility.
Any response to that, gentlemen?
Oh, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, we just responded to your question concerning the analysis of geothermal. We looked at all the various options and alternatives that we had. You know, many of our customers and clients live on fixed incomes, and the rates that we are going to charge are critical, and we look at those. As you know, the kind of the triad for the municipally owned utilities is having the lowest rates we possibly can, having the best reliability so that when people need power, it's there, and dealing with our customers to the best extent that we possibly can.
All right. Thank you both for that, gentlemen. Again, welcome to tonight's town hall event on the closing of the Drake Power Plant. If you are listening and you would like to submit a question to tonight's forum, please press 0. And now we are going to go to Dawn in Colorado Springs. Dawn, good evening. Go ahead and state your question to the forum, please.
I would like to ask what the council or the Utilities Committee proposed to replace the revenue generated by the power plant. I know that the city retirement pensions for like police and fire always seem to be short. And what better way to raise money for those retirement funds than to get the profit or the revenue by city-owned property that has no debt and is forming a service. And As far as the comments about the appearance to the approach of the city, I think that is a very, very weak reasoning. Everything they've done in the past has caused the city to look like it's being vacated, and I would like to know why they think it's not good to use coal since Obama's rulings have been overturned and coal is available at a competitive price.
Don, thanks for participating in this town hall. You bring up some great questions about the rates and what we think about in terms of funding of this. It's one of our primary issues that we deal with. Obviously, your thoughts about the appearance of Drake are that it's not that bad, and that the benefits that we get from the Drake power plant as it sits outweigh any changes. Am I right with that? At least with that analysis of what you're saying?
Looks like we may have lost Don there, unfortunately.
Okay, would anybody else like to respond to his questions concerning the rates?
Can I just add one thing? This is Jill Gabler. I mean, he made a comment about funding city services with revenue from CSU, and right. I think it really just needs to be, we need to remind folks that CSU and the City of Colorado Springs, while CSU is an enterprise of the city, they are separate entities and they don't combine their budgets in any way, and nothing CSU does goes back to fund the city's pensions or police or fire or any other city services.
Thanks, Jill.
Don't.
All right, folks, and now we're going to have an opportunity to get a little feedback from you this evening with a poll question. And you'll be using the keypad on your telephone in which to respond. Our first polling question tonight is, prior to participating in this telephone town hall event, were you aware of the Utilities Board decision to decommission the Drake power plant no later than the year 2035? If you were aware of the decision, please press 1 for yes. If you are not aware of the decision, please press 2 for no. Again, our first polling question this evening is, prior to participating in this town hall, were you aware of the Utilities Board decision to decommission the Drake power plant no later than 2035? Please press 1 for yes, and please press 2 for no. We'll now go to our next question from Verlissa in Colorado Springs. Verlissa, please state your question for the forum tonight.
Good afternoon, you guys. Good evening, I'm sorry. My question, actually I had two, and my first question was, when you're using coal, is that a health risk to our city and mainly those who are working and living in the downtown area?
So is your question, is the use of Drake a health risk to our community?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, coal obviously is, an issue that we've been struggling with concerning, especially when you compare it with renewables. But we have no scientific evidence that Drake and burning coal at Drake, which, we do very carefully with the Newman scrubbers that have been added this year. All of the data that we've received indicates that the emissions that come out of those towers are not a health risk to our community.
Okay. Now, I don't want to sound ignorant or anything, but I honestly do not know what renewables are.
Yeah, renewables typically, and we're lucky that we've got, I guess 1% comes from hydro water. Other primary renewables are going to be solar and going to be wind for at least our area.
So these are things that we're trying to use in place of or with coal or with the gas or whatever we're trying to change it to?
Yeah, we're going to kind of partner with the renewables with both natural gas and coal. And the renewables, the problem, as John Romero said, is they're not available, especially when it's at nighttime or when there's no wind blowing. And we do not have battery storage to keep the solar or the wind at this point for any period of time. So we've got it in order to provide power to our almost 470,000 people in this community. We have got to use both natural gas and coal.
Right. Okay, I really appreciate that. Now, my next question was, now earlier when we were speaking, well, when you guys were talking earlier, it was mentioned that the price would go up for some and not for others. And one reason I heard was because it would be because of the usage. Now, that's understood in my head that, like, if I use a little bit more than you, naturally my bill is going to be higher than yours. But when all of this take place and the move come about, and we're still talking about different rates for different people, would this be now considered the areas that you live in? Would that be included with the rate going up as well?
No, let me ask Andy Pico to address your question.
Yeah, that's Andy Pico.
Hi, Mr. Pico.
The rates will go up somewhat in order to pay for replacement power, pay for transmission, and pay for the higher fuel costs of natural gas. And we're still working through the details of exactly how much each of those components are and what the alternatives are. So you would pay more in your bill depending on how much more you use electricity, but what you pay is going to be based on what rate class you are in. It's the same for residential. It's not different by geographic area. It's different by what kind of customer you are. So residential has one rate, commercial has another rate, and there's differences like that.
John Romero, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, that's correct.
Imagine that.
Perfectly correct.
Okay, thank you for calling in.
Thank you for that, gentlemen. We'll now go to Eric. Eric, thank you for participating in tonight's forum. Please state your question to the board members.
Hi, good evening. My name is Eric, and my question is, why are we looking to rush this process? I know you have a goal of 20% renewables. I figure the longer we wait, the more that area and those technologies mature. You've already talked about a lack of battery storage backup. I totally agree with that. I just don't know. I just don't understand why we would move any sooner than we have to, especially with the progress of technology. And honestly, as a homeowner, still reeling and adjusting from the cost increase from the Southern delivery system. So it just seems like more fees upon more fees, and I think it's better economically for the city to be as price competitive per kilowatt hour as possible. Thank you.
You know, Eric, great question, and I'm going to ask Andy Pico. We have board members that kind of agree with you, and you know, so
I think this is just a big waste of time. I think this should. I think the Newman scrubber should be given a shot. I think this is just a rush to do something that doesn't necessarily need anything to be done. But I'll let you answer. I'm sorry.
Thanks for your comment, Andy.
Yeah, this is Andy Pico, Vice Chair. I happen to agree with you. There are several of us on the board. This is not a done deal at this point. So it's the differences of opinion that are presently working its way through. I happen to agree that I don't want to undertake an expense of this type any sooner than it should be, because that saves all of us money in the long run. And I also think that we just spent an awful lot of money to put the Newman scrubbers online. They are working tremendously. They are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, and they're making the air within attainment of all of the required standards. And we need to take advantage of that. I think to decommission early is financially irresponsible. So I agree with you, and I think there's some more comments.
Yeah, Eric, let me have David Geislinger give you his perspective on this, dealing with your specific question about why now.
And Eric, I don't disagree with the assumptions necessarily, but I think what we've got to recognize and what we have forgotten in some sense is that the reason that our utilities are so beneficial to the community now is that there were people generations ago who had the foresight to look forward and to be proactive in investing for generations after them. If we do not pay for the cost of whatever is going to come next, what we're doing essentially is we're letting our children make that decision. I think a responsible board needs to consider what do we incur now versus what do they incur later. It is a factor. It certainly isn't the dispositive factor, but that's something that is important for me to consider.
We also have Jill Gabler that would like to comment and respond to your issue that you brought up, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Strand. I think Mr. Geislinger stated that very well about really thinking long term, and that is the charge of the Utilities Board, to be really thinking strategically. However, being a municipally owned utility, we also need to be listening to our ratepayers, and many of our ratepayers, especially those who live in the downtown and those folks who are concerned about our air quality, are asking us to relook at this issue. And so we are obligated to at least have this conversation, talk to our ratepayers like yourself, and have these honest conversations. We haven't made a decision yet, but I really appreciate your thoughts. I have not made a decision on this issue. I am really listening, trying to get the data and figure out what the best thing is to do for our community in the long term.
Bill Murray would also like to respond and add his comments.
Okay, everybody needs to remember that these particular generation facilities were built in 1925. And is that a correct? Make sure I got the right dates.
Well, not the current unit.
Not the current units. Okay, but within 10 years, they'll be within what, 5%?
When was 6 built?
Of the age.
68,
68, and Unit 7 was built in 74.
Younger than some of the members here, and they're also reaching their. Thank you. Reaching a level where we have to discuss replacement of some sort, and that's what part of the discussion is. It's a process looking over time, and over time there is a need to replace these with some other generational facilities, and it's just a question of what's the best way to replace them and what's the best method to efficiently get them power.
Eric, this is Tom Strand again. I think your question goes to the heart of what we're going to be discussing at the board meeting in December, and that's December 18th. And I will tell you that over the last 2.5 years that I've been on the board, most of the people that come to our meetings, which start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, in their monthly meetings, are in favor of changing, closing Drake, changing our source of power generation. And so we appreciate hearing from the other side, and we would invite you to come to the meeting and share your thoughts along with anyone else that's listening in that feels that Drake ought to be maintained as is or closed at a later date. So with that, we'll go to the next question.
All right, thank you so much for that, folks. Right now, we are going to take one of our polling questions, and you can use the keypad on your telephone to answer. And our second polling question tonight is, when thinking about the Drake Power Plant in downtown Colorado Springs, what is your primary area of concern? Please press 1 if your primary area of concern is air quality, health, and the environment. Press 2 that the primary area of concern is that it provides low-cost electricity. Press 3 if you are concerned about the economic downtown development, first and foremost. And press 4 if you are concerned about the image and reputation of the community, first and foremost. Or press 5 if you are unsure or do not have an opinion. One more time with our second polling question this evening. When thinking about the Drake Power Plant in downtown Colorado Springs, what is your primary area of concern? Press 1 for air quality, health, and the environment. Press 2 that the power plant provides low-cost electricity. Press 3 if you're concerned about economic development downtown. Press 4 if you are concerned about the image and reputation of the community. And press 5 if you are unsure and do not have any opinion. We are getting some questions tonight from our web audience, and Mark in Colorado Springs wants to ask, can you quantify the effect on greater reliability, the expected outage hours, etc., if we were to close the plant in 2025? Is it different under the 3 different scenarios? Again, that is from Mark who is joining us tonight via our web audience.
Mark, thanks for joining us. And on the web, I'm going to ask the Vice Chair, Andy Pico, and I think John Romero will also want to respond to that question.
It depends on what we replace it with. Our plan right now, or the option that is being considered, not a plan. Just a second. Can you hear me all right?
This is a web-based question.
That's a web-based question.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are planning, if we replace it in early, that would be a natural gas fire generating, which would be dispatchable, and the reliability would be the same. You wouldn't see any difference. The only difference would be if we were foolish enough to replace it with all renewables, and then the technology quite isn't up to that level at this point. But we're not going to do that, I don't think.
Mr. Romero, would you like to respond as well?
Yes, just to add on to that, every scenario that we looked at was to first ensure reliability for our customers. And so every scenario will be just as reliable as the other scenarios. So there is no difference between 2025 and 2035 when we evaluate decommissioning of the power plant. That's first and foremost our responsibility is to ensure that we can deliver power to our customers very reliably.
Next question.
All right. For our next question, we are going to go back to our callers, and Sandra will be joining us. Good evening, Sandra. Thank you for participating in tonight's telephone town hall meeting regarding the Drake Power Plant. Please state your question.
Oh, yes. Hi. My name is Sandra Perigine, and I've lived here in Colorado Springs for going on 30 years. Regarding Martin Drake, it has been reported on the news that Martin Drake is exceeding federal limits for emissions. And between now and the time that you do close it, what can you do to bring this down? If the scrubbers are not doing their job, effectively, then what can you do? Also, I am 100% for using renewables, green, clean energy, wind, solar. Absolutely. I think the main concern has to be our health, our well-being, and these toxic emissions in the air. That they really are dangerous. They're hurting a lot of people. And one more question: what other than Martin Drake? What are the other power plants using to generate energy?
Okay, Sandra, thanks for participating. This is Tom Strand. I'm going to ask kind of our power generation expert leader in Colorado Springs Utilities, Eric Tharp, to comment at least on your first question and talk to the issue.
The second.
Yeah, and the second too, concerning and I'm going to use the term pollution and whether or not we violate federal standards in terms of the Drake Power Plant emissions.
Okay. This is Eric Tharp. I'm the Chief Energy Services Officer for Colorado Springs Utilities, and there have been a couple of references to exceeding emission limits and the health impacts of Martin Drake. And I would say that we're not the health agency, but we report to a health agency. That's the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. They're in charge of setting the limits, and it's our job to comply with those limits, and we do comply with those limits. So we do not exceed the emission limits from Drake. And in fact, over time, we've seen significant reductions in our sulfur dioxide and our nitrous oxide emissions from Drake. Certainly over the last decade, we've made dramatic reductions in the emissions from that plant. The question about where are we getting the source of our power, we have natural gas on our system, we have coal on our system, we have hydroelectric plants on our system, and we have solar. Those are our principal sources of generation, and we'll be adding about 95 megawatts of solar in the next year or year and a half. So we are intending to rely more on renewables, but as several have mentioned, until storage, the issue of storage is solved or made more economical, it can't be the only solution.
Thank you, Eric. Next question, please.
All right. Our next question is from Leland. Leland, thank you for participating tonight. Also, to anyone else who's listening right now, if you have a question for the forum, please press 0 on your telephone keypad to submit your question to an operator. Leland, again, thank you for participating. Please go ahead and address the forum.
Yes, this is Leland Langston, Colorado Springs. I have a couple of questions. Number one is, what is going to be done with the land if Martin Drake is moved? Is the city going to sell that, or are they going to do something else with it? In other words, how has the property that Drake sits on going to help pay for the new plant? Number two, have you got any data on how well these scrubbers are performing? And a real quick question, did you consider nuclear?
Okay, Leland, I guess you got 3 questions. I'm going to try and address this. Tom Strand. I'm going to try and address the first one in terms of what are we going to do with the land, which, John, I think is about 6 acres of land for Drake?
About 40 acres available.
40 acres available.
Yes.
Okay. So a lot more than I thought. So we've got 40 acres, and Leland, I think that's a great question because that land being downtown and located near a city that economically has been very successful the last couple of years is going to be valuable. There are going to be some issues with some cleanup that have to happen. We have not made any determinations as to how it's going to be dealt, how much, if any, will remain with the utilities for transmission. But, you know, there's all kinds of opportunities for us to use that land to the maximum extent possible to find income that's going to offset the cost of the transitioning to a new location possibly and a new format of energy. But does anybody else have any thoughts about that? Bill, do you have anything? The nuclear option, I'm going to jump to that before I turn this over to Eric. I'm sorry.
He's chuckling at the nuclear option. But, no, actually we did take a look at that. This Andy Pico, we took a look at that a couple of years ago, the first study, and nuclear, quite frankly, is too much of a risk, both financially and politically, to pursue at this time. We're not large enough utility to undertake that kind of financial investment, and frankly, the regulatory restrictions or regulatory climate is extraordinarily risky, and not something we want to pursue right now.
Eric Tharp, the second question I think was about, did we look at, help me with this, Eric, what was your second question?
Scrubbers.
It was how well are the scrubbers working?
Right, great question. Eric?
This is Eric Tharp again, thank you. The scrubbers at Drake are working exactly as they were designed. They've been removing 95% or so of the sulfur dioxide that we would have normally emitted. So again, comparing what we were seeing prior to the installation of those scrubbers, we're knocking things down by a factor of 20 or so.
Yeah, we're really pleased with the performance of the scrubbers, which are now, I think, Eric, up to full operation.
Yes,
full
they
operation as we enter into December of 2017. David Geisinger also has a comment that he'd like to add to your question.
And this is not to minimize. I think the scrubbers clearly are doing a wonderful job. There is, from several constituents that I've heard, a disillusionment that coal can be made 100% clean. There is not 100% clean coal. So there is going to be emissions. There will be health impacts from emissions. That's just until we get perfect technology that allows for perfectly clean burning of coal. That's going to be a reality as well, and I think we just need to face up to that. And everybody on the board knows that, I think.
And again, that's one board member's thoughts that he wants to share with you, and I think we can go to the next question now.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. We're actually going to go to one of our polling questions for the evening. If you would like to respond to this polling question and you're in our audience, please use the keypad on your home or mobile telephone. Our third polling question for tonight is the closing date for the Drake Power Plant is no later than the year 2035. Would you be willing to pay more per month for electricity to have it closed earlier, in addition to other rate increases for infrastructure, fuel costs, and regulatory requirements. Press 1 if you would not be willing to pay more to close the Drake power plant earlier than 2035. Press 2 if you would be willing to pay 1 to 2% more on your electric bill to see the plant closed earlier. Press 3 if you would be willing to pay 3 to 4% more on your electric bill to close the plant earlier than 2035. Press 4 if you would be willing to pay 5 or more percent increase in your electric bill to close the Drake power plant earlier than 2035. Again, one more time, the question is, the closing date for the Drake power plant is no later than 2035. Would you be willing to pay more per month for electricity to close it earlier, in addition to other rate increases for infrastructure, fuel costs, and regulatory requirements? Press 1 if you would not be willing to pay more to see the plant closed earlier. Press 2 if you would be willing to pay 1 to 2% more on your electric bill to close the Drake power plant earlier. Press 3 if you would be willing to pay more by a factor of 3 to 4%, or press 4 if you'd be willing to pay 5% or more on your electric bill to close the Drake power plant earlier than 2035. And then our next question actually does come, again, from people who are participating in tonight's Town Hall Forum via online. And the question that is asked is, what are the cost differences to the Colorado Springs Utilities customers between the options for replacing the Drake plant?
You know, that's a great question. Tom Strand responding to the web online question. In terms of the cost differences, we're looking to get more definition on that when we meet on the 18th of December for that meeting. I'm not sure we've got those numbers at this stage in terms of the three primary different options, but they are critical to know what it's going to be. Now, I am going to throw this out with John Romero here because he and his staff have done most of the research in this. My understanding is that the rates, if we close Martin Drake Power Plant in 2025, 2027, 2030, or in 2035, the rates will go up a minimum of 6.5%. Am I correct, John?
That's a fairly complicated question because that information was based on decisions to shut down Drake anyway, the addition of potentially the energy vision that's there, and other costs that were already approved by the board for the 5-year plan. So what we're looking at is, if we're just trying to take Drake into consideration and the cost we would be looking at for Drake, what we're looking at really is more of a 2% impact over 25 years if we segregate everything else. So another way to say that is, based on the decisions that have already been made, it would cost, on average, 2% more over the next 25 years.
Each year.
But if you raise the rates one time, 2%, and then never change them again, that's the scenario.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, this is a complicated question that many in the audience are going to say, well, if I have a bill that's $100 currently for electric and natural gas, what's it going to be, you know, and we're going to study that. And that's going to be a critical question that your board is going to come to grips with in December before we make a final decision, and it'll depend on what that number is for the way many of us vote ultimately. So that's our web-based question. Back to you, Jason.
Thank you so much. Our next participant that is calling in this evening is Mark. Mark, thank you for participating in tonight's Teletown Hall event. Please state your question to the forum.
Yes, well, first of all, I want to thank you, Councilman Strand, and all the others, because I think it's great that we have a city-owned utility. I moved out here about 31 years ago from a place where the utility companies seem to be designed to simply take money out of our pockets and put it into their executives. I don't feel that way here, and I'm very, very pleased with it. Now, my question is more of an informational one because there have been a lot of good questions earlier on, but knowing that coal is not going to get much cheaper, what are the options of converting either Drake or Nixon to from a coal-fired plant to a gas-fired plant. What are some of the concerns that you would have in doing something like that?
Mark, that's a great question, and we've got Eric here. He's our energy mogul, and I do appreciate your compliments, not so much to the board, but to the 1,800 employees that work for your municipally owned utility, because every day they come to work to try and take care of the consumer and the customer and make sure the rates are as low as they can be while protecting the health and well-being of this community at the same time. So, Eric, if you'd respond to the question about natural gas.
Sure. And the question is, can we convert from coal to gas at Drake or Nixon? And that's a great question. And currently, many people may not know that Drake can run on gas today. So it's dual fuel. It can run on either. But the problem with running on gas at either of those two locations is the efficiency is not the same as what we would find in the marketplace. You pay a penalty of about 30%, so your gas efficiency is about 30% less running through a coal plant that's been designed to operate differently than the newest generation of natural gas plants. So, yes, you can do it, but it would be at a cost to our consumers that I think we wouldn't want to impose on them.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate knowing that. And again, my thanks to all of you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason, back to you.
So we have another question from online. What are some of the pros and cons of replacing the Drake plant on the same site versus elsewhere?
This, and I guess this is an online question, and another issue, this Tom Strand, that we have studied and we're looking at these options. We've got, should replacement generation be built at the Drake power plant location? No generation at Drake. The advantages of that are the downtown aesthetics, which are important to some people and not to others. The potential for importing or exporting resources, including renewables, through a regional RTO, a regional operation. The largest portion of land available for redevelopment would provide the 60 acres that we talked about with no generation at Drake. The potential for less reliance on a gas pipeline is obviously an advantage that we wouldn't have to deal with. The disadvantages of no generation at Drake require additional transmission projects, either there or at other locations within our community, and the potential for permitting and siting challenges in terms of having to get permits and siting approvals through other agencies. Now, generation at Drake, the advantage there is no new transmission lines would be required, at least at the beginning. Potentially the earliest decommissioning time could happen if we had generation at Drake. Either we could take 6 or 7 or both out with some other kind of plan. The site is already used and permitted at Drake for generation of electricity. The generation is close to the load. In other words, the requirement that uses the electricity, and there would be some land for redevelopment because we wouldn't use the whole 60 acres at Drake. The disadvantage of generation at Drake is, again, the downtown wouldn't look quite as pretty to some people. The coordination of construction and decommissioning of the plant is going to be complex and costly. There are requires to continue additions of generation. We'd have to have some generation going forward in the future. We may require some backup fuel, and there is a greater potential for constrained gas pipelines. I hope I've mentioned that and commented on the online differences between using Drake and not using Drake going forward into the future. Can we get the next question, Jason?
Absolutely. Our next question comes from our callers, and we are going to go to Joel. Thank you for calling in and participating in tonight's forum. Joel, go ahead with your question.
Hello. I appreciate the board doing this, although I have serious doubts as to whether the public input will be considered. When you say you didn't know what the costs were, I'm curious as to what moved you to want to move up the closure of Drake after all the decision-making had been done with the last board, and whether or not you've considered the huge cost impact on manufacturing. Manufacturing sector has been diminished, and one of the reasons there's any left at all is because of the low-cost power production that we have, which Drake comprises about a third of our power. How is it going to affect DPICs, some of our data centers that are in Colorado Springs? These are huge line items for manufacturing and job sectors, and the fact that you're considering closing this without the long-term impacts being known is very concerning in terms of the economy of Colorado Springs. And I think a lot of times we kind of get the blinders on the board. I know in the past it has, that development is the only key driving sector, and maybe that's because they're who's funding campaigns or whatnot, but the development in southwest downtown, there's no way it can account for the huge increases in the cost of power generation. I just want to know to what extent you're looking at that analysis in terms of manufacturing and other sectors, because it can't be looked at in isolation.
Joe, I'll start. There may be other board members and staff that want to comment. First of all, your comment about to what degree are we going to listen to the town hall participants, and we're also next Wednesday going to have at 6 p.m., we're going to have a live town hall over at City Hall. We wouldn't be doing this, unless we were interested in hearing from the constituents, from the owners, from the people out there. And for one, I listen to every comment that's made and take them on, take them very seriously in terms of the decision making that I make. I think I'm very concerned and interested in what the impact of closing Drake earlier, what it has on industrial and commercial. You talked about manufacturing under industrial. They, in fact, it's very important to us because it's part of, business development, job creation, and all of those things. We all know, all 9 of the board members, that, the rates that we charge for electricity, natural gas, and water are critical to new plants coming into our community and plants expanding. And so, that element is very important, and we're going to take that, very seriously. We had a member at our meeting just last week on Wednesday talk about the impact that increasing the rates would have on his very large company. And we listened to that very carefully, and we're going to take it on board. I mentioned earlier that the town hall, where you can come and actually in person, live, and in color, make a presentation to us like we're doing now with this call-in. I said it was next Wednesday. It's actually next Tuesday, and it's going to be in our town. It's going to be in the conference room or our council chambers in City Hall. And I encourage you to come and share some more thoughts. Now I'm going to look around and see if there are any more responses. David Geislinger, would you like to respond to Joel's questions?
Yes, a couple of things, and it kind of echoes the board meeting we had our last board meeting. The military, if you recall, Council Member Knight talked about the military is interested in the portfolio of generation that the city can provide. So it supports our relationship with the military to kind of expand, or at least that's an option. And then another reality is there's a lot of businesses that are looking to locate and relocate, and the types of generation within the city are a factor for those businesses. So it's not just a question of if you have low rates, they will come. Some may come, some may stay, some may not come, and some may go away.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks for your interest, Joel. And again, I'd invite you to next Tuesday's meeting. Your comments, resonate with us, and we'll take them, into deep consideration. I'd like to take the next call. Jason.
Actually, sir, we are going to do our last polling question first for tonight. And if you would like to answer and participate in this poll, just use the keypad on your phone, on your mobile, or at home. And our last question for this evening is, now that you have heard more information on the possible scenarios tonight and costs for replacement power if the Drake power plant were to close earlier than planned, and again that year is 2035, which option do you think is the best path forward? If you think the best path forward is the option of building a new and smaller plant on the same site, please press 1. If you would like to see the building of a new power plant or importing power from outside the city limits, press 2. If for the option of a combination of building a new and smaller power plant on the same site, as well as building another smaller power plant or importing power from outside the city limits, press 3. So again, now that you've heard some information this evening on the possible scenarios and costs for replacement power if the power plant is to close earlier than planned, which option do you think is the best path forward? Press 1 for the option of building a new and smaller power plant on the same site. Press 2 for the option of building a new power plant or importing power from outside the city limits. And press 3 for the option of a combination of building a new and smaller power plant on the same site, as well as building another smaller power plant or importing power from outside the city limits. Again, that final option, press 3. And now we will take another question for this evening, and this is going to be Jacob. And Jacob is actually participating online, so we thank him for following our call tonight. And his question is, in the cost estimate, did you take into consideration the excess cost of pollution? Again, that question is, in the cost estimate, did you take into consideration the excess cost of pollution? And again, we thank all our online web participants this evening.
Well, that's an interesting question. This is going to be the last one we're able to take in this town hall, call-in opportunity tonight. In the cost estimate, and this Tom Strand talking to the online question, we did not take into account pollution because we don't have any scientific evidence of what the negative impact of pollution or social costs may be. It's a very important element. All of us think about it a lot, but it was not taken into consideration in the cost estimates that I've seen so far. Mr. Pico.
We did look at that during the Drake study a couple of years back, and then we had two different analysis, one without and one with. But and then we took a look at the from a non-quantitative basis. So we haven't ignored that, but they're not factored in the current costs.
And Andy, that was during the EIRP that was done.
That was actually before that.
Before that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if you look at it,
Mr. Murray,
if you look at it, the Newman scrubbers were a direct result of the cost of pollution. So that's a factor that's already been put into the entire picture. So yes, in reality, we are looking at the overall effects of pollution and how it affects our community.
Good point.
Okay, my understanding, Jason, is that's the last call for tonight.
Yep.
So over to
that
you.
That wraps up all of our audience participation, and I believe that we were going to have some closing remarks from the board before we wrap up this evening.
Yeah, I will do that, but I want everybody, we do have 5 board members here, and I want to at least make sure I made the introductions, but final comments, and I'll start with Vice Chair Andy Pico. Any final comments or thoughts about what we're about to undertake concerning considering the Drake closure?
We're trying to take a very thorough and solid look at it. There's differences of opinion on the board, but we're taking all those different ideas into account, and we're trying to do a very thorough analysis of the costs.
Board Director Joe Gabler.
I think I'll just add that I really appreciate those who took the time out of their evening to spend it with us to talk about Drake Power Plant. It shows I don't know, just how much our citizen ratepayers care about our community, our air quality, and their rates, and it means a lot that you took the time to talk to us tonight.
Board Director David Geislinger.
And again, I'd echo what Ms. Gabler said about thanking all who took the time to become involved. I think listening to the questions that were asked kind of evidences why there's a disagreement on the board, because there's a disagreement within the community. We are a large community that has a lot of different approaches to this, all that need to be taken into consideration. There are economic costs that are easily measurable relatively, and then there are social costs that need to be given a measurement, and that's why the decision is complicated. So I appreciate your assistance, and yes, we're going to listen to everything that was said and all your input. So thank you.
Board Director Bill Murray.
Well, there's no disagreement that it's all about community, and it's both environmental health as well as economic health, and trying to find that algorithm, that balance line that bills out the best interests both now and in the future. And that's what we've got to consider is what does the future look like, and how can we position ourselves and you to benefit the community.
And close this out, I, Tom Strand, as your current chair of the Colorado Springs Board of Directors for your municipally owned utility. I can't tell you how much we appreciate what you're saying, and I want you to know that we do listen. And, if there are other ways you want to communicate with us by sending us email, texts, by participating, calling us on the telephone, this is going to be a very interesting next couple of weeks. If you would like to hear more, we are, as I mentioned earlier, hosting an in-person where you can show up, town hall meeting next week, Tuesday, December 5th, from 6 to 7:30 in our chambers at City Hall on Nevada Avenue. The Utilities Board will be meeting on Monday, December 18th at 1 o'clock to consider Drake planning and the future of Drake. Information on both meetings can be found at csu.org. Thanks again, and good night.
Thanks to all our audience members and Chair Strand and Mr. Romero for participating tonight. We really appreciate it, and have a good evening, folks.